We have listed in our bulletin a hymn, Love Will Guide Us, but that was included accidentally. So we're going to go on to meditation, time of meditation, which will be a reading in your gray hymnal, responsive reading, number 442. We bid you welcome. We bid you welcome, who come with weary spirit, seeking rest.
Who come with troubles that are too much with you, who come hurt and afraid.
We bid you welcome, who come with hope in your heart.
Who come with anticipation in your step, who come proud and joyous.
We bid you welcome, who are seekers of the new faith.
Who come to probe and explore, who come to learn.
We bid you welcome, who enter this hall as a homecoming.
Who have found here room for your spirit, who find in this people a family.
Whoever you are, whatever you are, wherever you are on your journey,
we bid you welcome.
The words, you can sing along with us.
I want to start out today by channeling Joel Osteen. I want to tell a joke, people. A rabbi and a minister decided to buy a new car together. The day after they bought it, the rabbi found the minister driving it. The minister explained that he had just gone to the car wash because in his religion, it's customary to welcome a new member with the rite of baptism. The next day, the minister discovered the rabbi had turned their car into a convertible. Takes a minute sometimes. I actually found that joke on a site called Jularius, which might be the single best name for a religious joke site that I've ever seen. Today we're talking about covenant, and when deciding upon the title of my sermon, I settled on "You're out of covenant." But what I really wanted to say was, "You're out of covenant, dum dum dum." Because let's be honest, the phrase has an air of, "Honey, take a seat, I need to talk to you about something." Or, "Charlotte, the principal would like to see you." It's hard enough when we realize in the privacy of our own hearts and minds that we have said or behaved in a way that is not up to our own standards. So it makes sense that having someone else call it to our attention would create a feeling of dread, embarrassment, or perhaps defensiveness. The good news, however, is that while being told you're out of covenant may always invoke that icky feeling, it should be countered with the knowledge that every single person in this room will hear that phrase or know in their hearts that they have stepped out of covenant at one point or another. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What is a covenant? The word covenant is Latin for come together. It means a solemn agreement or promise from the heart between a course of action between parties. It's most often referred to in religious texts as a contract of sorts between humanity and God. There are actually 5, though some scholars would argue 6, covenants within the Torah alone. There's the Abrahamic, Mosaic, priestly, Davidic, and perhaps the most well-known, Noahic covenant. Noahic being, of course, Noah. For those of you unfamiliar with the story of Noah, I'll give you the briefest of summaries. Yahweh deems the earth and all of its inhabitants to be evil, with the one exception of a man named Noah, most recently played by Russell Crowe in what I thought was a fantastic reinterpretation of the original text, but I digress. In an effort to create a new Garden of Eden, Yahweh brings forth a flood for 40 days and spares only Noah's family from death. The story ends as the waters dissipate and a covenant is created between God and Noah, indicating the sacred promise that a deluge nearly wiping humanity from the earth will never occur again. This covenant is sealed with a rainbow. In the New Testament, we find the aptly named New Covenant, which is the covenant Jesus established at the Last Supper, when, according to Luke, he said, "This cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood." The new covenant, the sins of the first covenants are forgiven, and eternal salvation is offered with Christ's sacrifice as the Redeemer. Now, unlike the Mosaic covenant that was written in the form of the 10 Commandments on rock and was conditional upon the Israelites following the law, the new covenant is said to be written on the hearts of believers and is unilateral, meaning that God bound only herself to hold the covenant together, making the offer unconditional. It's not at all surprising that something as legalistic as a contract, even a blood contract like those I just named, would be present in Judaism and early Christianity. Judaism is often described as legalistic, meaning that understanding, practice, and obedience of the law were of the utmost importance to the meaning and practice of the religion itself. Particularly because the conditional covenants that had been created between the Israelites and God meant that disobeying the laws of the Torah would bring God's wrath. Judaism is not alone in the legal nature of its texts. Most pre-modern religions tended to be more legalistic in nature. Examples being the 613 mitzvot, or laws in the Torah, or Sharia Islamic law, and the 684 laws of the New Testament. But as suggested in the definition, as I mentioned earlier, a covenant, while interpreted to mean a contract between two parties, goes much deeper than a mere legal promise. It is a sacred and binding commitment, and therefore far more important than a signature on a page. Paper can be torn in two, can be made invalid by a judge, but not a covenant. The way I'm speaking of it calls to mind the unbreakable vow from Harry Potter. You know what I'm talking about. With the wands and the magical binding, a bond so sacred to break it means to die. At this point in the sermon, you're probably remembering the part about Unitarian Universalism being a covenantal religion, and with the words flood, blood, wand, and die floating around in your heads, you're likely calculating how many steps from your chair to the door. But relax. While our use of the term covenant certainly comes out of our historical and continued connection to Judeo-Christianity, the term is repurposed for Unitarian Universalism and modernity in general. In our context, covenant is not a legally binding document, not between one another or between us and our idea of the divine. We do not require a blood sacrifice, thank goodness, or a flood of epic proportions. And unlike in Harry Potter, we UUs don't even require a wand, which I'm not going to lie, I'd love to have. For Unitarian Universalists, for a free religious tradition, we do, however, ask your commitment to live out the standards we set for ourselves together within these walls and beyond. We're not a faith of doctrines. You often hear that UUs are about deeds, not creeds. Creeds being a formal statement of faith. This means we don't require that you publicly pledge your allegiance to a central belief system in order to become a member. This is because Unitarian Universalism recognizes that what's left when boiling down a theology to its most basic principles does not look the same from one person to another. We recognize that if we are truly a free faith, we must be free from fear, intimidation, and righteousness as a tactic of membership. We do not want you to join because you fear eternal damnation if you do not. We do not want you to join because you feel pressured by your peers or because our culture requires it. We want you to join because you have willingly chosen, with a free conscience, to be a part of our beloved community, to engage in the work of this faith because your heart calls you to it, knowing that you are always welcome to grow, to change, to evolve within these walls, and affirming a creed is not conducive to that growth. The question has been asked of UU since our merger, well, if you don't have a central creed, what do you have in common? How can you worship together? How can you remain in community with one another? How do you relate to one another? Besides our humanity, this is where our covenant comes into play. The very basis of our church polity or governance is covenantal. In the Cambridge Platform, written in 1648, our Puritan ancestors stated that although we are to be independent churches, churches who have the right to elect our own governing officials as Congregationalists, there are certain responsibilities that come with such rights. We are responsible for supporting both financially and with additional resources our sister congregations. Not only that, we are responsible for identifying the ways in which they are out of covenant with themselves, their fellow churches, and in the association, the Unitarian Universalist Association itself. This association we independent churches have freely chosen to identify with. And when the difficult and awkward task of making a transgression known is over, we then are responsible for inviting that church back into covenant. Similarly, we ask that you, having consciously agreed to be a part of our beloved community, recognize the rights and responsibilities you have to that community through the use of a covenant. We have a covenant here at Georgia Mountains. Actually, we have many. A covenant for the Board of Trustees and unique covenants for each of the groups affiliated with the church. But what I think is perhaps the most important covenant we have here is the GMUUC Right Relations Covenant, adopted at the annual meeting in May 2005. How many of you are familiar with it? Not enough. For those of you who are not familiar or need a refresher, the covenant reads, "We promise to actively listen to each other, employ flexibility toward differing opinions and thought, using honest, non-hurtful language, respect each other's inherent worth and dignity in accordance with the principles of the UUA, honor and utilize existing systems for conflict resolution, and continually re-educate ourselves on these processes as necessary. Accept mutual responsibility of expressing and honoring personal boundaries. Address concerns directly, promptly, and personally in a manner that promotes mutual respect and avoids triangulation. Accept tasks responsibly and positively, and seek help if needed. Continue to promote our church and welcome newcomers. Be mindful that individually and collectively, we are representatives of the Georgia Mountains Unitarian Universalist Church and the Unitarian Universalist Association, and conduct ourselves in public events, small and large, in concert with our principles and covenant." This covenant is great. It outlines how we are to be in relation with one another and the larger community. It was crafted by some of the individuals sitting in this space now and being democratically voted into place. It should be at the very heart of every word or deed we commit to here. This is what holds us together with no creed. The desire to do right by one another, by our church, by our faith. To have compassion in our community, in our relationships. To take responsibilities for ourselves. To respect the autonomy of others. To show pride in our actions and our representation of who we are, and to continuously grow into a better version of ourselves. It's quite lovely and lofty. Practical, but lofty. We can't all live up to these words all the time. And that's okay, because this document tells us that we are loved anyways. We are worthy of forgiveness and worthy of the effort it takes to call our mistake to our attention. A covenant is a mechanism for holding one another accountable for the promises we make. It's something we can always refer back to as it's in writing. But it does not just apply for our experiences here within our own church. It, just as the new covenant is, should be written on our hearts. I did my chaplaincy residency at Emory Hospital and learned one of my biggest life lessons so far in the process. People often think that one of the most difficult parts of clinical pastoral education, the requirement for the UUA to become a minister, is working with the sick and dying in a hospital. This is a fallacy. That is the easy part, an honor that gives back tenfold what a chaplain puts into it. The difficult work is done in the classroom with your supervisor and your small group of peers. It's the work of this educational process to call to your attention all of your own baggage. Your prejudices, how your history, your pain, your own loss, and theology informs your pastoral care. This can only be done if one of your peers or supervisors, having seen the baggage you bring affecting your work with patients and families, in your language or action towards your peers, names it. It's a brutally painful process to have your inadequacies, weaknesses, or what those in ministry lovingly call growing edges, laid bare in front of your peers. One of my peers was, on paper, my theological, social match. I mean, we should have been best friends from the get-go, on paper. But for various reasons, we butted heads worse than anyone else in the group. And I struggled with this. I did. I wanted to know how, why, what could I possibly do to heal this wounded relationship? I spoke with my mentor about it, and his words changed my life. While he didn't tell me I was out of covenant with my peer who was not a UU, he said, "Charlotte, can you love her better? Can you love her better, because this relationship could be the most important lesson you never wanted to learn." His words knocked the wind from my lungs. I'd been so concerned with distinguishing whose fault it was, using nonviolent language, what exactly I could say or do to fix things with her, using my head to overthink, of course, to analyze and produce an outcome, that I had forgotten the vital importance of calling myself back into covenant. His words, "Can you love her better?" This was the equivalent to God's unilateral covenant with Noah. I was the only one in control of maintaining my covenant, my commitment to myself to live up to the first principle of Unitarian Universalism. I'd like to tell you that things worked out between the two of us and that my peer and I became best friends, but that was not the case. However, my distress over the situation ended the moment I called myself back into covenant. I had taken my mentor's advice to heart and found ways to love my peer the way I knew in my heart I was capable of doing, without pride or judgment. Knowing I had done this meant that I remained in covenant with myself and my idea of the sacred. That was as much and as little as I needed to do. Covenant will not fix every issue we have as a church, but it should lead us in how to treat one another when those issues arise. When this church creates a covenant, it's expected we will all follow it, from the newest member to the choir, to the child care staff, to the minister. We are all committed to the same covenant. And all that means is we all share the same grounding. Should you or I step outside of our covenant, it's expected that, like our sistership with other congregations, another member is responsible for letting us know, while also extending a hand to invite us back into covenant. And that's the key, the hand reaching out to the end. Like when I send my 2-year-old to timeout, I tell her what she did to deserve it. When she's ready, she apologizes. I accept it, give her a hug and kiss, and tell her that I love her. The purpose being that she understands what she's done, she understands what she's done, while always being reminded of her worth and inclusion in our little family. Our covenant to her, whether spoken or not, is non-conditional, just as our love is non-conditional. She needn't earn it, it simply exists. This is how we operate as a faith, and in my experience here as your minister, I have seen this non-conditional love exemplified. While there are some rules that need to be followed so that we can exist together, we operate in a way that a member of our community needn't earn our love. It exists, and hopefully it is never in question. Paulo Coelho, author of the novel The Alchemist, wrote, "We are travelers on a cosmic journey, stardust swirling and dancing in the eddies and whirlpools of infinity. Life is eternal. We have stopped for a moment to encounter each other, to meet, to love, to share. This is a precious moment. It's a little parenthesis in eternity. During your travels, to whom and to what will you make your commitments? During your brief moment here on earth, there is so much to see and do, and so much to commit yourself to. Will you make a covenant to love this church, its members, the community at large, knowing full well that there will be times you will fail, but always, always, there will be a hand welcoming you back time and time again. Amen."